We're continuing on this fourth Sunday in Lent. Can you believe it? Fourth Sunday. Continuing in these few chapters in John's Gospel. We're in the middle of chapter 15, and we are in verses 12 through 17. So hear now the word of the Lord from John 15, 12 through 17. Again, these are Jesus' words. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands that you may love one another. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, have you ever watched a little kid make a friend at school or on the playground? It's really interesting. One little person will walk up to another and say something like, "Hey, Alice, do you want to play?" And before you know it, the two kids are off and running, enjoying their time together. My older daughter, Teresa, made a friend this way once when we were on vacation about 5 years ago, and she met a girl named Rose at the park, and they kept playing a few times over the week. And it was hard for her to understand when we had to go why Rose didn't just come with her to Spokane. I think that making friends as an adult can be a little bit more difficult, mainly because we carry a lot more history with us. We have stories and betrayals and insecurities that a new friend may not understand right away. And honestly, I think it takes energy to get to know a new person, don't you? But have you ever been on the other end of things, hoping desperately that someone could be a friend to you? When my husband Matt and I got married, I moved from the West Coast, where I was living, to the East Coast in Pittsburgh to start our life together. Now, he had been living there for over 10 years. We met long distance through my cousin, so he had lots of community and close friends and people that he did things with. And I had exactly 2 friends, my cousin and my cousin's wife, and they had to be my friends because we were related. So I would kind of, calculate, how often can I ask my cousin's wife to go on a walk with me? Is every day too much? So the first 3 weeks of this time, we were first married. I'm in a brand new city. And this was lonely time for me because my husband had things he had to do. He was getting on with his studies, and he had committees he was on and meetings he was going to. And I was about to start seminary, but I hadn't started yet. So I spent a lot of time cleaning our 1-bedroom apartment over and over again. That didn't take me very long. I needed some friends of my own. And I cannot tell you how good it felt when a few women invited me to join them once we started seminary on a weekly study date at a bakery. And we did this every Saturday for 2 years. They barely knew me, but they knew I was new, and they reached out and they just said, "Come with us." I felt this burden lift. Well, Jesus has some things to say today to us about friendship. Words that I think are comforting and also a bit challenging, but that's Jesus, right? He's always a little bit of both. The thing with what Jesus has to say to us, he starts out by saying, "A commandment I give you, to love one another." He's starting from love when he starts to talk about friendship. And this is true of anything that Jesus says or asks of us, and that is that his words always start from this place of love. Love God, love neighbor. We've been talking about this Lent. Love is always the motivator. In this case, in this short passage, these 5 verses, he reminds them to love one another at the beginning of the passage and again at the end of the passage. It's like he's framing these words on friendship with love. It's almost like he wants us to know that we cannot have friendship without love. Seems obvious, yes? But perhaps not as easily lived out. Earlier in John, just a few chapters before, Jesus says basically the same thing, but he calls it a new commandment. He says, "A new commandment I give you, to love one another." So this was new for them to hear this. Or Jesus thought they needed to hear it anew, right? And I wonder how this hit the disciples. Surely they had seen Jesus acting out of love during his ministry years in the way that he showed compassion and offered healing, especially to those least deserving of attention. But to have him say it outright to them, love one another, this matters. Also, Jesus is nearing his death and taking the opportunity to make a farewell speech of sorts to his inner circle of friends. He's reiterating the things that are most important, and love is right there at the top. I've had 2 different pastors in my life say the same thing about love and Jesus in the Bible, and I'll repeat them here today. One of these pastors was a colleague in ministry, and the other was a pastor of mine growing up. And they said, on matters of doctrine and theology, always start with love. Teach the truth in love, respond in love. When in doubt about what God says about something in the Bible, make love the default. You can't go wrong. Seems like this was Jesus' motto too. So, we've started with love, so what? Well, Jesus gives this picture of friendship that kind of exemplifies this love. And Jesus says that friendship is being willing to make a sacrifice, laying down a life for a friend, which he is about to do for us on the cross. And I'm challenged by this because I'm not sure I can say that I would die for a friend. Maybe, but I don't know. That's a hard word, right? I think the core of what Jesus is saying here is less about us dying for one another and more about what he has done for the sake of relationship with us and making that this example and letting us know that real friendship within the body of Christ, real friendship requires a lot. It's actually a really heavy, weighty, beautiful thing. Jesus has crossed the cavern of sin and death to be God with us, that presence that the gospel writer John here is so keen on getting into our heads and hearts. And also, so Jesus is our friend. Also, Jesus cares deeply about teaching us how to be good and faithful friends, and he begins by showing his friendship to us. He says that we are no longer his servants, but his friends. Last week, we noted that Jesus flipped that cultural leadership model, which was authority over servant. He flipped that on its head, and he offered this branch and vine metaphor that was much more even, much more participatory. So here he goes again. God, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, is saying we are no longer his servants. That's astonishing, actually. Particularly in any culture, but in this culture where the deity, the God, would be, those less than would absolutely be servants. And Jesus says, you're no longer my servants, you are my friends. That's really mind-blowing, actually. And as such, we are invited into Jesus' inner circle of friendship, The passage says that Jesus tells his friends things about the Father. He's sharing inside information with his friends over intimate dinners. And we are included in that invitation of friendship with Jesus. We are valued. We are counted as a companion. Wow. So here are a few specifics behind Jesus' offering of friendship to us. First is that friendship in this culture, I think this says something to us today, is a lot more than having coffee with someone after work, although that's important. I need that too, right? The friendship that he's referring to in this context would be about making bonds between households. If you had one person really befriending another in that sacrificial way, that meant that those two families that were connected to those people were then connected to one another. So in other words, if one of those families had a need, the other would step in because of that bond of friendship. They would take care of each other. Jesus is joining families together through this invitation of friendship, right? Which means that if Jesus offers friendship to me and Jesus offers friendship to someone that maybe I'm not super comfortable with, we're a part of the same family. That's a little bit challenging. Because Jesus, when he offers friendship, when he offers that gift of salvation to people, to anyone, he is inviting anyone into that family, into his household, and a household would be to say, you have a share in my inheritance. So not only are we friends, but you have everything that my household offers. In other words, if we have a need, Jesus will help us solve it because we're his friends. So secondly, Jesus says that we are chosen. This is an intentional kind of friendship. We are invited into this friendship for a purpose. That's the appointed part. He says we're chosen and appointed to bear fruit. Remember last week? And we remember, of course, that the Israelites were God's chosen people, appointed by God to establish his kingdom here on earth. And here Jesus is expanding that. He says, we are chosen to be a part of his family, and we are appointed to continue to establish this kingdom on earth. So there's two things going on here. That friendship is that bond between families, and then we are chosen. It's intentional. God pursues us in friendship. So that's great. What's next? How are we to be a friend to others in our community and beyond? We heard Leola read about Abraham earlier. Abraham is charged with this mysterious welcoming of 3 strangers into his home and shows them hospitality and friendship and welcome. And then a little bit later, we read about how God has chosen Abraham. So Abraham is this kind of experiences this friendship of God and being chosen and appointed. And I wonder how we might be challenged to do the same. We can talk about love and friendship and our relationship with God for a long time, and that's important. But what does it mean in the practical sense for us today? What does this mean for Emmanuel Presbyterian Church on the corner of Chelan and Cannon? We can learn much from Jesus about how to be a friend to others. And I think the easier aspect of this invitation has to do with perhaps tweaking the way we are friends to those we already know here in our community. You all are really good at being friends to one another. I have seen that in action, even in just a month. It's really beautiful. You care about each other. You're aware of what's going on in each other's lives. I think the trickier part comes when we consider that Jesus offered welcome and friendship to the stranger, and we are invited to do likewise. And I think you do that too. And I think we all, me included, need this reminder. So I have a few questions for us to ponder as we prepare to move from this place, this sanctuary, after pizza, of course. As we move on from this place today and this week out there in our neighborhoods, in our social settings, in our places of work, in all the things we do beyond these walls, here are some questions to ponder. As you pray about it, and I do invite you to pray about this, to really take some time and pray. Is there someone Jesus might be inviting you to befriend in a new way this Lent? Is there someone who needs the fellowship that you enjoy with Christ and with his people? Now, perhaps this person would like to be invited for a cup of coffee and a conversation. Perhaps, if the Spirit leads, would love an invitation to church next Sunday or perhaps on Easter. And not just that invitation to church, but that follow-through and intentionality of real friendship. Pray about it and see what God's Spirit stirs in you. I really think that at the core of human beings is a need to feel like we belong. And there are so many folks that we cross paths with every day who could use that reminder that they are included too. So what we learn from Jesus today, I think at least in part, is that it all starts with love. Because that's what Jesus did. He started with loving us, loving all these people that perhaps some would say were beyond that invitation of love. And Jesus said, no, I will love you and I will call you friends. Jesus did this and invites us to continue with love as we reach out, as we pray about what God might be having us, how God might be having us show friendship to others. And to show that love even when things get messy in friendship and relationship, because they will. So, as Jesus says, I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another. Amen.